Ever wonder why whenever these bought and paid for right-wing mouthpiece tools always do an interview, they never really want to do one outside the cozy confines of Fox News or some right-wing website?
Would you mind defining woke? Because it's come up a couple times and I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
So, I mean, woke is sort of the idea that this is going to be one of those moments that goes viral. I mean, woke is something that's very hard to define, and we've spent an entire chapter defining it. It is sort of the understanding that we need to totally reimagine and redo society in order to create hierarchies of oppression. It's hard to explain in a 15-second soundbite.
Yeah, look, time.
I mean, it's one of those things that everybody.
The Hill, by the way, is right-wing as they come, but all it took was one question, and Bethany Mandel fell completely to pieces. She showed everybody she literally has no clue what she's talking about. But we ought to ask some questions about Miss Mandel, since apparently she wants to be something of a noteworthy media figure. Who is Bethany Mandel? Well, to hear her tell it, she's just a stay-at-home mom who homeschools her 5 or 6 kids. I want you to remember that description, by the way, stay-at-home mother who homeschools her kids. You will be seeing it again. Bethany Mandel is mad because she completely invalidated herself in front of the entire world, and all the right-wing racists who also traffic in the same kind of revisionist racial propaganda she does, they're furious on her behalf, because the truth of the matter is, you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. And after all, if you're going to throw around the word woke all the time, I don't think it's asking too much for you to actually know what you think it means. See, the problem with the anti-black racists is that they all operate out of the exact same playbook. So when Christopher Rufo tries to redefine critical race theory just so he can attack all things black, we see Bethany Mandel doing the exact same shtick. The white right have chosen yet another term created by and associated with the black community, and they're attacking it as a euphemism for black, and everyone can see it. Everyone knows what this is. Since 2020, they got their teeth kicked in, and now they're doing this racial foghorning where they attack black people by weaponizing the few state legislatures they still control. Now, before we go any further, there's something you need to know, something the white media isn't going to tell you. And that is, people like Christopher Rufo and Bethany Mandel, they're not just sprouting up out of the ground. Sure, we've had a bunch of these little mouthpieces popping up the last few years, but that's not a coincidence. These people are paid operatives for these right-wing think tanks. That's who finds these individuals and then sends them out to cause chaos in society. I've told you about how Christopher Rufo is an employee for the Manhattan Institute, the same organization that produced Charles Murray. He was a long-time employee for the Manhattan Institute and later went on to write the infamous hate tract The Bell Curve. Another Manhattan Institute employee is Heather McDonald. She wrote The War on Cops. John McWhorter and Douglas Murray are also Manhattan Institute operatives. So you see a lot of the anti-black propaganda being pumped out daily coming from just this one think tank in particular. But the Manhattan Institute is far from the only one. Bethany Mandel tries to describe herself as a stay-at-home mom who homeschools her 6 kids. Well, for someone who simply stays at home all day teaching her kids, she sure seems utterly consumed and obsessed with what she claims is being taught in schools. Her kids are not in school, remember? So why is she so utterly obsessed with schools and what they may or may not be teaching when her kids aren't even in school? They're at home. She's just a traditional Susie homemaker, a stay-at-home mom. Well, at least that's according to her. But of course, as with so much else these right-wing operatives say, that's not true at all. Because when you look at Bethany Mandel's LinkedIn page, you see that this stay-at-home mom made time to go work for the Heritage Foundation. Now, if you want the full rundown on the Heritage Foundation, you can watch my video, Why Roger Ailes Isn't Going Away, which you can see on this very YouTube channel, but the 2-sentence version is this. Joseph Coors of the Coors Brewing Dynasty used his money to fund the John Birch Society, one of the most notoriously anti-black and anti-Semitic organizations in U.S. history. William F. Buckley, the preeminent conservative speaker of his day, denounced the John Birch Society as being racist, so Joseph Coors used his money to start a new organization with the same goals as the John Birch Society. That's where the Heritage Foundation came from. This is who Bethany Mandel works for. Now you'll notice that I said works, as in present tense, because while Bethany tries to make it seem like she only worked for the Heritage Foundation for 1 year over a decade ago, all you have to do is look on Amazon and you see the Heritage Foundation has been pushing COVID propaganda, and who do we see as one of their featured speakers? Bethany Mandel. And this was just 2.5 years ago, not 12. The fact that she's still producing material for the Heritage Foundation, wonder why she wouldn't want to put that on her LinkedIn. And something else this stay-at-home mom doesn't mention, her new fiction book, Stolen Youth, in which she calls out the wokening of America's youth. It was published by DW Books. DW stands for Daily Wire. That's Ben Shapiro's little toilet. So Ben Shapiro is the one who put this bilge out there, and it's going about as well as you would expect from him. They're trying to claim that it's a national bestseller. With who? The Daily Wire website, perhaps? I can only wonder how many books some of these right-wing think tanks mass bought. Their Twitter, by the way, has been taken over by tons of people who are informing them that they already know all about Bethany Mandel, and she's a joke. On the same day that they announced her glorious sales debut, her meltdown was going viral. Hell of a debut indeed. Rather than showing herself to be a credible and intelligent polemicist, she instead exposed herself as being just another brain-dead right-wing crank who literally doesn't know the words coming out of her own mouth. That's what happens when you lie. Now you see why all these right-wing racists prefer to be on Fox News or some other online sewer like Daily Wire, where nobody's going to actually ask them to explain what the hell they're talking about. She proved that she and Christopher Rufo and Ben Shapiro and Ron DeSantis and the rest of their ilk are the brain-dead morons that we all said they were. But understand, Bethany Mandel is putting forward a phony persona, same as we saw at all those school board meetings where those right-wing think tanks and organizations were bringing in outside operatives to go from one school board to another screaming and yelling, and they made sure to tell the local TV stations to be there to film it all. It was a staged performance. The people who were yelling at those school boards claimed to be concerned parents, but a lot of them conveniently left out that they didn't even live in those school districts, and in many cases their children were grown and out of the house or otherwise not in school. Bethany Mandel is doing a variation on the same con. She claims to be a stay-at-home mom who's writing books because she's so concerned about what's being taught in school, even though she homeschools her children. For a stay-at-home mom, she sure does spend a lot of time away from home. And how does she do that? I mean, with 5 or 6 kids, and with her staying at home, she and her husband ought to have their hands full, struggling to make ends meet like every other stay-at-home mom, right? I mean, one thing's for sure, Bethany Mandel definitely doesn't have any maids or cleaning staff or anything like that. That would be ridiculous, wouldn't it? Oh. So in 2009, Bethany Mandel was angry with her maid and on the verge of firing her. You know, a problem that every stay-at-home mom has. What to do about the help? But things must have improved for her financially because by 2021, she went from having one maid to having cleaning ladies, plural. And she tells herself they're more happy about her babies than she is. No joke, she said. Now, how does anyone truly believe that? Given her ignorant remarks, does anyone truly believe that she has any clue what her domestic servants think? After all, she was yelling at one of them just a few years earlier. I find it interesting that she says her Hispanic cleaning ladies were more excited about her latest child than her own family members were. Well, it seems her family members don't care about her life very much. Gee, I wonder why. But this simple stay-at-home mom, who does nothing but homeschool her kids, makes enough money where she and her husband can hire multiple cleaning ladies to do their work around the house and clean up after her and her 5 or 6 kids. That way she has time to run around from one white media outlet to the next, being the belle of the right-wing ball. Man, she takes stay-at-home moms seriously. All she does is stay at home. She doesn't lift a finger except to rage at people. Because you won't be surprised to learn that Bethany Mandel loves to brag about how she goes super Karen on people, raging at medical workers, and then lamenting that she has to turn around and ask them for an appointment. Talk about ineptitude. She also goes on tirades about deliverymen and homeless people who she says smell, and bragging about how she got a delivery man fired before 9 a.m. Mandel goes on Twitter and ridicules the homeless. She doesn't do anything to help them. She instead thinks the right response to the homeless is to mock them and ridicule them. So she doesn't want schools teaching kids that the founders of the U.S. were slave owners. To her, that's hateful and wrong. But she has no problem teaching kids that homeless people should be ridiculed and mocked. She's teaching that to her kids, and she's also teaching it to yours by what she posts online. Does this seem at all like the phony, pretend, mild-mannered act that she was putting on when she was on the Hill? Look at how controlling this woman is. She wants to control everyone around her, and if she's displeased with you in the slightest, she'll call your employer, or rather scream at your employer, until she gets a refund or gets you fired or both. Does this seem like someone who is genuinely concerned with child education, or a psychopathic racist control freak who gets mega triggered by any and everything and frequently flies off the handle in her insane attempts to control everyone else's lives? Look at what she says. Look at how she talks about people. I disagree with her on one thing, though. She doesn't need to control herself better. Bethany Mandel just needs to control herself, period. And there's plenty more posts where these came from, but I gotta tell you, she's been purging her own Twitter profile today, deleting those homeless tweets. You can still see the tweet links on Google, and a few hours ago people were able to respond to them, but when you click on the links, this is what you get now. So Bethany Mandel is busy scrubbing her social media. She's trying to play the part of the victim these days, pretending as if going on the Hill and being asked, gee, that word you keep using woke all the time, what does it mean? Apparently that was some sort of ambush. She's trying to actually say that she was ambushed on the Hill, simply by being asked, what does the word woke mean? Well, the assumption is that if you use the word so much and you wrote a book about it, you're supposed to know what it means. I guess with her in Meltdown, crashing and burning in front of the world, becoming a joke to everybody, this probably sounds like something Ben Shapiro came up with. This is what you say is that you're the victim. This woman says something about parents, and you're a mother of six, and it struck you to your core. Do you believe that a woman who mocks the homeless, that a woman who yells at the people who clean up her home, who yells at medical personnel for no reason, do you truly believe that somebody would say something that would rattle somebody so heartless and cruel? But because of the fact she made a grand fool of herself in front of the world, now she's trying to get rid of all of these tweets and posts that everybody's reminding her of. Well, my question is, why? What is she trying to hide? Her true self? That's what. I'm showing you the real Bethany Mandel, the one that she doesn't want you to see, the one that Ben Shapiro doesn't want you to see. This is who the white right sends out as their political avatar for the mild-mannered, good-natured, all-American mother. It's a total lie. Bethany Mandel is a pampered, entitled, rage-prone bigot who habitually goes off on people for no reason, then whines about pet stores and delivery drivers in between bouts on right-wing TV, making up fairy tales about what's being taught in schools that her kids don't even go to begin with. As the white right declines and descends into irrelevance, this is what they're reduced to, simply sitting around all day with their maids doing everything for them, looking for something, anything that they can be angry about. And when they fail to find something that they can be mad about, they just make something up. By the way, on a side note, in case I didn't mention it, Bethany Mandel homeschools her children. That's important because if this woman is the one educating her kids and she literally can't explain herself when she's asked a basic, simple question, then can you imagine how uneducated her kids are? You can't tell me that a woman who claimed to have written a book about wokism can't even define it, but is somehow giving her children a quality education? It doesn't make sense. She just told the world she indoctrinates her kids. You don't have to know anything in her world. You just have to repeat the talking points. It doesn't have to make sense, because intelligence isn't what Bethany Mandel values. What she values is walking lockstep with anti-black racism. She posted all this hateful stuff. Why is she trying to hide it now? Because when your con game is trying to trick people into thinking you just want kids to learn good moral lessons, seeing tweets about screaming at radiologists and mocking the homeless and getting delivery men fired kind of makes you sound like a raging Karen who will attack anyone for little reason or no reason at all. Which is exactly what Bethany Mandel is. Deception, lies, hiding information, putting up false pretenses. This is what these right-wing think tank operatives do. This is how they operate. In fact, it's basically become a meme unto itself. The right wing are attacking all these things with racial undertones against black people, critical race theory. That has to do with what black people are saying about the legal system in America. Wokism, that's black activism. And then when people ask, can you tell us what this stuff means? Crickets. Why are these right-wing think tank operatives just so stupid? Well, the problem is they all work for the idle rich. The Joseph Coors and the Koch brothers, they don't actually work. These white racists live in bubbles. They live in gated communities, exclusive areas with private security. In many cases, they even own their own personal islands. The people who own these right-wing think tanks that employ the Rufos and the Mandels, the only people who are allowed around them are their maids and butlers and nannies, their chauffeurs, their personal pilots and assistants. They live every single day with people doing nothing but waiting on them and catering to their every whim and agreeing with their every insipid, ignorant, stupid word. Now, what do you expect to come from people who live in this kind of an artificial reality? One thing's for sure, it won't be the truth. In fact, they'll actively hate the truth and be violently opposed to it, because reality contradicts their gated community, 1% of society view of the world. The other 99% simply won't tell them what they want to hear. So we see these rich racists using their money to try to manipulate and deceive and trick or even coerce the 99% into going along with their own racial delusions. These rich donors who the Rufos and Mandels act as sock puppets for are totally out of touch with reality. Kind of like a stay-at-home mom who never leaves the house and her only contact with the outside world is Fox News or right-wing websites. So these rich donors to these right-wing think tanks just sit around all day with their other closed-off exclusivist pals, and they all gripe and complain about every little thing they don't like. None of these things are actually problems for them, but as far as they're concerned, the fact that it merely exists displeases them. And that's enough for them to use their massive fortunes to start a holy war against whatever. And because these rich racists live in their own little bubble, nobody ever challenges them, and nobody ever tells them no. And since ignorance attracts ignorance, you get people like Rufo and Mandel who naturally go to work for these rich racists. People like Rufo and Mandel are both intellectually dishonest and morally cowardly. They'll never have the nerve or even the intelligence to tell their rich benefactors that they're wrong. I've been saying it for years and will keep saying it. You cannot understand this right-wing jihad that's going on unless you follow the money. The people who fund the Heritage Foundation are also the same people who fund the Manhattan Institute, the Federalist Society, and all of these other right-wing organizations that you see. They fund these right-wing radio stations and even Fox News. There is a direct pipeline from these right-wing think tanks to these white media outlets like Fox and these right-wing hate radio stations. They're the ones who take the lies that the Manhattan Institute cooks up and then tries to push them out onto the society. They try to turn their fiction into everyone else's reality. It's a closed loop of propaganda, a conveyor belt of lies. Christopher Rufo himself admitted that the phony racial hysteria that he created over critical race theory was all a lie. He openly bragged about it. Almost exactly 2 years ago, Rufo tweeted, quote, "The goal is to have the public read something crazy in the newspaper and immediately think critical race theory. We have decodified the term and will recodify it to annex the entire range of cultural constructions that are unpopular with Americans." Now, when he says people read something crazy in the newspaper, what he's talking about is the anti-black propaganda that people like himself make up. Keep in mind, Rufo wrote this at a time when his racial hysteria hustle that he was running in Florida was hot in the news. So it was at that moment he decided to make this admission. He admitted what everyone already knew. Critical race theory doesn't mean what he was saying it did. He just wanted to redefine critical race theory into a new catch-all phrase and to attach to it anything that he thought would be unpopular, which is exactly what people have been saying he was trying to do. Making that admission was his first mistake. When you're pushing a lie, you're not supposed to say that part out loud. And just to make it clear to everyone that this wasn't some misstatement, 10 days later Rufo boasted, "I am quite intentionally redefining what critical race theory means in the public mind, expanding it as a catch-all for the new racial orthodoxy. People won't read Derek Bell, but when their kid is labeled oppressor in the first grade, that's now CRT." Folks, that's a smoking gun with fingerprints. He admits that he is intentionally lying about what critical race theory is, that he just wants to make it into a political catch-all term by deliberately claiming it means things that it doesn't, and he knows it doesn't mean those things. He admits that all the grade school fairy tales he was making up about CRT wasn't CRT at all. He wants to manufacture a new definition spun out of whole cloth. Now, of course, nobody is calling first graders oppressors, but we all know that the lie that they generated was used as a launch pad to fabricate a pretense for going after schools, universities, government agencies, even businesses, under the guise of protecting white people's feelings. You know, when you violate the Constitution just to protect people's feelings from an imaginary threat, it's kind of hard for you to claim that that's not white fragility. Now, why would he come right out and admit that his entire racial hustle has been nothing but a pack of lies? Why would he admit to the entire world that his detractors were right and that he was deliberately lying about a graduate-level legal course of study, telling everyone that it's a Marxist indoctrination when it wasn't? Why? Because Christopher Rufo has been a failure his entire life. This was the first time in his existence that he felt like a success, and because he's not used to winning, Christopher Rufo simply couldn't help himself. You're probably familiar with the infamous Lee Atwater recording where he admitted that the GOP used terms like school busing and even tax cuts as racial code words for attacking the black community. Except that was decades before the recording came to light. And why did it take so long? Because Lee Atwater didn't want people to know what he was doing. Same with Karl Rove and even Roger Ailes. You see, competent political operatives understand that the key to real success is not letting people know that they've been lying to them. Sure, political operatives lie a lot, but you don't tell the public that's what you're doing. The difference being Atwater, Rove, and Ailes, they had all enjoyed success well before they got into politics. They didn't have to try to take the one time that the white media covered them and try to show everybody how clever they thought they were. Mustache twisting is for idiots and the insecure. Christopher Rufo is both. He doesn't have any wins. So when the white media seemed to be giving him some attention, he simply couldn't help himself. This is what happens when you spend your life failing, because you won't be surprised at all to learn that Christopher Rufo, like Ben Shapiro, Steve Bannon, and Dinesh D'Souza, desperately wanted to be a filmmaker, and he failed at it. Fun fact, did you know that Ben Shapiro once tried his incompetent little hand at being a novelist? Well, at least he can still claim that he writes fiction, but Rufo has never been successful at anything. He's failed at everything he's ever tried. Nobody even knew who this clown was before a couple of years ago, and truth be told, he owes his notoriety more to Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson than to himself. Rupert Murdoch is who made Christopher Rufo a thing. But Rufo tried to be a filmmaker and failed, and Bethany Mandel, she's also a scribbler of sorts. She claims to be a stay-at-home mom of 6, but when you look at her online and offline activity, you see that she's a full-time right-wing extremist who demands that we befriend neo-Nazis. She wants to befriend neo-Nazis? Well, that explains why she also demands that books be burned, particularly those that talk about the history of race in America. Like with like, I always say. Now, of course, the alt-right racist trolls try to claim that, well, you probably didn't read her op-ed, did you? To which I reply she hasn't actually read many of the books that she once banned either, and the few she glanced at was only so she could totally misrepresent their contents. The rich white racists who fund the Manhattan Institute that Rufo works for push the idea that black people are inherently inferior to whites. They push doctrines of racial inferiority all day long. And Rufo's fine with that. When he talks about what is racially offensive, everyone understands that he's trying to redefine that too, so that it only means what white racists find offensive, which is, as we've all seen, everything. Everything offends them. Everything makes them mad. They're crazy as a rat in a tin outhouse. But the reason these guys keep getting made to look like fools all the time is that they literally don't have a clue what they're doing. It's not even being effective, not the way they like to tell themselves it is. The think tank propaganda that they push only catches on in a few angry red counties in Florida and some other backward states from the old Confederacy. Rufo claims that he wants what he's doing to sweep the nation. But unless he can make it work in purple and even a few blue states, he's not going to be sweeping anything. This is part of the problem that came out of the Trump years. Donald Trump did nothing but play to his base for 5 years straight, from the day he announced his candidacy to the day he lost the presidency. And for the white right, they thought that's a winning strategy because Trump, the improbable candidate, won in 2016. They simply never accepted that the only reason Donald Trump won the presidency was because black voters stayed home that year. But that's not what the Manhattan Institutes and the Heritage Foundations and the Rufos and the Mandels have told themselves. No, they claim that it's because there was this previously undetected groundswell of angry white voters who hadn't voted ever, but now they were suddenly mobilized in 2016 because there was someone saying what they all knew to be true. This delusion was why they were so surprised by how Trump lost the Senate, all those midterm races that he lost, then they lost the House and the presidency, and all of this in his first and only term. Yes, Trump played to his base, but that only works if the Democrats' base doesn't turn out at all. Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama demoralized the black base of the party, but Trump's incessant race baiting galvanized the black base all over again. For all his flaws, and they are legion, that was one mistake Barack Obama didn't make. He didn't do anything that was going to galvanize the white right. No matter what Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity tried to do, they could never get the white right a full head of steam about coming out against Barack Obama, because he himself didn't allow it. But Republicans haven't learned that lesson, so they keep throwing red meat to the base, trying to be the dictators in a few small corners of the country where they still have a majority at the state legislature level. But nobody else is going to follow them. They're preaching to the choir. They're not converting anyone to their ethno-autocratic delusions of dictatorship. In fact, they're mobilizing opponents against them and turning off the very white suburbanites that they desperately need to attract. And these right-wing operatives get so angry whenever anyone calls them on their lies. NBC did a piece pointing out how Rufo admitted his lies about what critical race theory is and tried to make it into a straw man. It was his own tweet being published. What was there not to like? Well, apparently Rufo didn't like it at all. He got predictably butthurt that NBC actually quoted his tweet verbatim. He went completely berserk. He lost it. And why? Because NBC told everyone that he's lying and that he himself admitted he was lying. Nothing in that reporter's tweet was inaccurate. Rufo's problem is that he's so insecure and so stupid, he came right out and told everyone that he's lying about critical race theory. And by the way, why is Rufo angry at a reporter for what he calls misrepresenting his work when he himself wants to be celebrated for intentionally misrepresenting critical race theory? If what NBC did is so wrong and dishonorable, then Rufo should also admit that what he's doing is also equally wrong and dishonorable, especially since he's made a cottage industry out of it. The humiliation of Bethany Mandel is hilarious, but one thing it isn't is new. We've seen this before. When Trevor Noah famously humiliated Tomi Lahren live on air by first getting her to pretend as if she wasn't opposed to the anti-racism protests, and then asking her what form of protest from the NFL players would she have approved of. She couldn't answer, and Trevor knew exactly why that was, the same way everyone else knew. And he just kept coming back to that question, hammering it over and over again, not letting her out of the trap. It was deliciously painful to watch that worm Lahren squirm and try to stall for time and refuse to answer until in the end, she was broken and at long last forced to admit that she didn't think the NFL players had the right to protest at all. So much for free speech, huh? Every time they step outside of their right-wing bubble and into the real world, they get crushed, and easily, because these right-wing puppets aren't trying to make an argument. Mainly because they don't have one. They're just pushing political talking points. This isn't about persuasion because, as they've shown us time and again, their ideas are simply, I'm white and I deserve to be in charge. And that's not going to persuade anyone. Yet they have to keep screaming that because the sheltered, rich, conservative racists who they work for demand that they stick to that message. They keep losing, but every time they do, they decide that their mistake was that they weren't pushing the race baiting hard enough. So instead of stopping to think, instead they double down and keep making fools of themselves. Making up straw men is a bad idea, because that's what liars do. But this is exactly the strategy that these white right think tanks came up with. They got their teeth kicked in so badly on the racial, political, and social front in 2020, they've been traumatized. They've lost it. So they've just screamed at their operatives to do something, anything. Just show that they still have some political power somewhere. So we see these racial confidence building exercises going on, taking the most backward parts of the country and trying to turn them into bulwarks of unabashed anti-black racism. This is history repeating itself. These places have already been these little mini apartheid states before, and how did that turn out the last time they did it? That's what the school book bans are about. They're trying to control anything that they have funding or influence over because they've lost everywhere else. To try to attack their political opponents by demonizing anything associated with black activism. That may rile up the base, but their base is shrinking. People like Rufo and Mandel are what Republican Mike Murphy called the incompetent operative class. They're just smart enough to use Twitter and just dumb enough to repeat their rich racist boss's talking points word for word. They don't have to be smart in order to work for these think tanks. They just have to be obedient. And that's why they keep making fools of themselves. Rufo, Mandel, D'Souza, and others all try to wrap themselves in the phony veneer of starched suits and knee-length dresses as a way to try to come off as reasonable or something other than the garden-variety, mouth-frothing anti-black racists that they actually are, which is why they all keep failing. Everyone sees right through them. It never occurred to them that they don't have the pulse of the masses. That's why they keep having to lie, and when someone is allowed to lie with impunity long enough, they soon forget what reality is. And then some host of an online podcast asks you if you can define the words you keep using incessantly, and you fall flat on your face. This is the class and caliber of people that these right-wing hate organizations, think tanks, hire. Now, the question that needs to be asked is, why didn't this moment already happen to Chris Rufo or Bethany Mandel before now? Because Christopher Rufo in particular has been on some of these white cable networks, and, well, he didn't get checked like this. And the reason why is these clowns that are being hired by MSNBC and such, like the joke reads, they're no more intelligent than a Bethany Mandel or a Christopher Rufo to begin with. Most of the white media agrees with these online racists, and they want to maintain the basic argument that these racists promote. They don't actually want to discredit a Bethany Mandel or a Christopher Rufo. The Hill itself is a right-wing toilet. Now, the black female host, she brought a little bit of sunlight in, and Bethany Mandel withered and melted like the witch from The Wizard of Oz. But don't go fooling yourself that The Hill is some sort of balanced news outlet. It's not. It is a white conservative organization. That's why the white conservative co-host had to run to the rescue and play white knight for Bethany Mandel and try to answer the question for her. This is what happens when you decide that lying is going to be your entire political platform. Making up straw men backfires when people know you're using a straw man. These right-wing tactics are not a strategy. That's part of why they keep failing, due to their own internal contradictions. They're pulling themselves in two directions. Their real audience is not the American public at all. Their real audience are the rich racists who give them their paychecks. That's whose opinion they really care about. But it doesn't work. That's why in the last 2 years we've seen Rufo and his other bought and paid for right-wing cohorts switching the rhetoric up so often. First it was critical race theory in 2021, but Ron DeSantis made the mistake of using his GOP-dominated legislature to actually try to solve this problem that didn't exist, which wound up with a bunch of laws that have mostly been struck down left and right. But once you write all those laws, you can't turn around later and say, we're going to try to ban critical race theory or wokism again. So Rufo and company realized they had taken the anti-CRT horse as far as it was going to go. So they began railing against transgender anything. And now they're just blathering about woke, which they've now admitted is just a racial catch-all for anything they don't like. So we see that Rufo's intentional redefining tactic is still in effect because they can't think of anything else to do. They just keep on doing the same thing, just more of it. To have a mind that is alert and aware of what's really going on around you, that's what it means to be woke. And that's a good thing, because this is what happens when your mind is asleep.
Would you mind defining woke? Because it's come up a couple times, and I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
So, woke is sort of the idea that this is going to be one of those moments that goes viral. Woke is something that's very hard to define, and we've spent an entire chapter defining it. It is sort of the understanding that we need to totally reimagine and reduce society in order to create hierarchies of oppression. Sorry, it's hard to explain in a 15-second soundbite.
Well,
Yeah,
take
look,
your
it-
time.
Good evening, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Codified Trucking, Joseph, Richard Foster, Morris Bodden, and Washington. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.